And so we begin tonight with some late breaking news coming from Integrity Center. And it is emerging that one of the commissioners, Professor Jane Onsongo, has resigned. Onsongo is said to have quit this evening, citing what she called endless wrangles within the commission. She was reported to have been under pressure from unspecified quarters to resign. However, earlier in the month, we did report about a letter that had been written to the president by Onsongo and her fellow commissioner, Irene Keino, in which they called for the sacking of Commission Chair Mumo Matemu. Now, in a strange twist, however, the commission later claimed they had buried the hatchet and that, in fact, the letter had been based on false information. Later on in this newscast, we shall be taking a closer look at the legal implications of Professor Onsongo's resignation. But now, let's turn to this Super Bowl for a closer look at just the events that happened this afternoon in Parliament. We're talking about that infamous list of shame, and we did promise you that we'd be telling you just who exactly is on it and what they have been accused of. And we begin with Charity Ngilu, the Cabinet Secretary for Lands. She has already stepped down, so it doesn't come as a surprise that she is on the list. However, what is she being accused of? Colluding with Evanson Waitiki to inflate the price of Likoni land by 110 million shillings. In order to understand why this is important, you have to remember who Evanson Waitiki is. He is the owner of a land parcel, well, I don't even think it should be called a parcel, in Likoni, which is 930 acres, which he did say that he had not sold to the government. The government, however, said, rather the Ministry of Land said that they had purchased it in order to resettle 120,000 squatters who had been staying on that land. Now, Ngilu is accused, or rather alleged to have received, or was going to receive 65 million shillings once the government bought that land. She's also accused of colluding with other officers to deprive Mita Limited of land along State House Crescent in Nairobi. So that's CS for Lands, Charity Ngilu. The CS is not the only, Charity Ngilu is not the only CS accused. We're also seeing here the CS for Energy, Davis Churchill. So just what exactly has he been accused of? Attempting to influence Kenya Pipeline Company tender costing 500 million shillings so that it could go to a company called Sinopec instead of Zakem. This is where the story is. The tender was meant to corruptly yield $15 million to be shared between himself and Nairobi Senator Mike Mbuvi. Now, in case you're wondering, $15 million, if you look at the exchange rate today, is equivalent to 1.3 billion Kenya shillings. Let's move on to the next one. A face which is not familiar, a name that you might not know, but a name that most certainly holds a very powerful office, or at least did until she was suspended. Mary Ann Kitani. She was the Deputy President's Chief of Staff, so no doubt a position of influence. She was accused of abusing office and misappropriation to the tune of 200 million shillings. But here is the clincher: diverting 100 million shillings from the Legislative and Intergovernmental Relations Office to mobilize MPs who are going to have an abortive campaign in July of 2014 to impeach the Cabinet Secretary for Devolution, Anne Waiguru. I don't know if you remember that. The reason why this name is here is because it's not just the prominent figures, it's also the people behind those prominent figures who have been named on this list of shame. Let's have a look at the other one, a person who Nairobi residents will know very well, the Governor Evans Kidero, accused on two fronts here. This is the allegation that comes to him while he is governor. He is accused of procuring irregularities by officers of Nairobi County by signing an MOU with Forton, and Kidero is also said to have signed this deal worth 4.6 billion shillings in a plan to launch Metro Transportation System. That plan, as we know, has already come into motion. However, this is not the only thing that he has been accused of. He said that while he was the MD for Mumias Sugar, he proceeded to give legal fees of 300 million shillings. Rather, he processed legal fees of 300 million shillings and immediately paid off 280 million of that 300 million shillings to an individual. And what's more, it was to a personal individual's account. And the name of that individual was Mr. Ojenda. What's more is that the services were never rendered at that Mumias Sugar. So that's the allegation facing Nairobi Governor Evans Kidero. Then we look at another governor, Isaac Ruto. Now, Isaac Ruto has been very vocal with regard to the issue of graft. He yesterday said that people in Bomet were campaigning to take over his position as governor, but he did say, laughing it off, that they would campaign and they would leave him there, giving an indication that he has no indication of stepping aside. But what is he accused of? Accumulating immense wealth. What is this wealth? 40 earth movers estimated at 400 million shillings, chopper estimated at 300 million shillings, operating numerous petrol stations and single sourcing for ambulances in his county, which were going for 650,000 shillings each per month from the Kenya Red Cross. Now, we'll be coming back to this particular allegation shortly and why it's important. But first, let's have a look at Johnston Kavuludi. Now, this is an interesting one because he is a chairperson of the National Police Service Commission, essentially the person who hires police officers in this country. And he is being accused by the EACC of financial impropriety, misappropriation, abuse of office at MPSC, and he's also said to have made various trips abroad not accounted for. Now, these allegations seem very non-specific if you look at the other ones, but what's interesting is that he's been accused alongside two other officials of the National Police Service Commission, including the CEO, James Muhoro, and another commissioner known as Ronald Musengi. What's even more interesting is that on that list, there are 100 police officers of various ranks who've been accused of dealing with suspect property contrary to the Anti-Corruption and Economic Crimes Act. So, the employer is being accused, the employees are being accused. The question is, who will probe who? But let's have a look at this next person, Nduva Muli. This is the Principal Secretary for Transport. He's been accused of several things, but this is the one that jumps out at us. Irregularly facilitating the disposal of the Kenya Railway properties and irregularly awarding the tender for the standard gauge railway. Remember that much talked about. KTN covered it extensively to the Chinese company involving 320 billion shillings. This figure is not new. The issues surrounding the standard gauge railway are not new, but the fact that Nduva Muli is squarely being accused for what happened is what is new. We'll be discussing this again later on in this bulletin. So who else is on this list? Another name which might not be very popular or might not even be well known, and a face that we don't know, but his name is Richard Odenyo. What we do know, however, is that he's a senior principal magistrate. What is he being accused of? Irregularly approving a bond without proper court orders in the Akasha brothers case, a case which garnered a lot of national interest because the US government requested for their extradition to Interpol, given that a red alert had been issued against them for drug trafficking. But Richard Odenyo is not the only magistrate who made it onto this list. Frida Nyakundi is another one. She is a former senior resident magistrate at Kibera Law Courts, and she allegedly received a bribe worth 2.4 million shillings so that she could lower a drug trafficking charge to something lesser. Who are the people bribing her? According to the EACC, media personalities. Now, these media personalities were acquitted of this lesser charge because there was no evidence found. And also Wilson Kaberia, another magistrate of Kajiado Law Courts, who was accused of garnering immense wealth from taking money from human traffickers who in the EACC report were said to be of Somali descent. But that's just a short list. On that list, however, 6 sitting members of parliament, 13 governors, 2 senators, and members of 2 parliamentary committees, not to mention 5 cabinet secretaries.
Well, thank you very much, Edith, for that very extensive. It will be very interesting to see exactly what happens, because we have seen, this is probably the first time we have seen such an extensive list of public officials being, accused of such graft. But then again, what's next after that? This is what we're going to be watching from now on, isn't it?
Well, actually, this is a conversation we're going to be having in this bulletin. It's an important discussion to have. Is it enough to have a list of names? Do the allegations actually hold any water? Is it possible that these allegations will lead to prosecution and possibly even jail time for some of these names that have been listed? Well, if I were you at home, I would stick around because that's a conversation you wouldn't want to miss.